Welcome back to the Curdverse. I'm Lisa Kaywood, corporate functionary by day, home cheesemaker by night. Here we are at the end of May, and this is the season of transhumance, when herders who have spent winter months in lower elevations take their animals up to graze on fresh grass and wildflowers and high mountain pastures for the summer. It's a lifestyle that has been in decline in rich countries for several decades, but it's starting to see new life for several reasons. I talked about transhumance in much more detail in episode 9. Switzerland, home to the highest peaks in Europe, has a special attachment to this tradition. And with us today to talk about the traditions of Swiss cheesemaking is Caroline Hostetler, a Swiss native and founder of Adopt an Alp, a nonprofit aimed at supporting small, independent Swiss cheesemakers. A word on Swiss cheeses before I hand things off to Caroline. While many of us tend to promptly imagine a big wheel of chewy yellow cheese with lots of big holes or eyes in it, Switzerland in fact has a broad diversity of cheeses, and most don't have big holes. But it's worth explaining just for a moment where that notion comes from. The classic Alpen cheese is lower in salt than many other types of cheese because salt is heavy, and it's hard to carry a lot of it up steep mountain roads. The cheese also isn't strongly acidic. Alpen cheeses tend to be around 5.7 to 5.4 in pH when finished, which is a bit higher than many other firm cheeses like cheddar or Gouda. The ones at the lower end of that range, say 5.4 like a raclette, are in fact the perfect pH range to get nice meltiness when a cheese is heated. I'll include a link to an article on meltiness in the show notes. Because these cheeses are neither heavy on salt nor on acid, and are sometimes aged for a while in slightly warmer than average environments, say upper 60s Fahrenheit or around 20 C, a certain microbe called Proprione shermani can grow well within the curd. P. shermani is very gassy, and that's what creates those iconic holes. They're bubbles of CO2 that get trapped in fresh, still elastic curd. But again, not all, nor even most Swiss cheeses have these holes. The high mountain cheeses do tend to be cooked to higher temperatures than many other cheeses, up to 110 F or 43 C, which squeezes a lot of whey out of the curd fairly quickly. This helps keep the curd from acidifying too much while it's pressed and aged. And it also means that the cheese can age gently and evenly for a long period of time. And that's a good thing, because winters are long up in the Alps. One other iconic element of Swiss cheesemaking is the use of large copper vats. Copper distributes heat exceptionally well, so cheesemakers can heat large quantities of milk quickly over high heat without risk of hot spots and scorching. Copper also has some antimicrobial properties, which may also help offset the relative lack of salt and acid in moderating microbial growth. Caroline and I talk about all of these things in this interview, as well as how the land is allotted and how the Swiss cheese industry has evolved over the last 100 years. But what I think comes through most clearly from our discussion is a vivid image of life in the fresh, clean air of the high Alps. Caroline, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hi.
Caroline, tell us a little bit about yourself and also maybe a little bit about Adopt an Alp.
My name is Caroline. I'm a Swiss native. I have a journalist background, food journalism, that was in the end. And I emigrated with my husband and young family to the US in 1996. Still was working as a journalist, and I missed where we stayed in Florida. I really, really missed great cheese, and so much that 2 years in, I started and tried to import cheeses from Switzerland. And I had some because I followed the whole food scene and the chefs and culinary world. I did some presentations. I did a 2 weeks long trip. And when I got back, I had the first 2 orders on my fax machine. And that was the start in the cheese business in the US. And So Quality Cheese is a very small, specialized importing and distribution company. And in 2013, so 10 years ago, I founded and started Adopt an Alp, a program that basically supports people who still do transhumance and move for the summer into higher altitudes and make this wonderful cheese that is a centuries old tradition and is a little bit endangered. So I try to, through education and creating understanding and respect and value, to support people who still do this. And it's a wonderful program that has created a lot of relationships and very beautiful human relationships between customers, consumers, buyers, and the farmers.
Well, why don't we start there actually with transhumance? It's obviously something that goes back millennia in Switzerland and in many parts of the world. Um, how does that work in Switzerland in particular?
So basically, how it works is the farmers um, do move in the late spring, early summer, depending on the region they are. That will be between the middle of May to middle of June. They go to higher elevations and they make cheese because of that very, very precious, the most precious milk of the year, basically. And they are not cheesemakers by trade. They don't make cheese year round. They really only make it while they're up there on the Alp with the high biodiversity, where they make the cheese right where they work and live, and the animals are grazing and living and breathing. So it's a farmstead in quadruple basically, and the season lasts also depending on the circumstances, the year, the altitude, usually around 100 days, we say roughly. So it's a summer undertaking between 3 and 4 months of the year. And then in the fall, they go down again. That means the meadows get a break. They can recuperate, they can breathe, they can grow again, they get a rest. And the farmers and the animals go down and, uh, and do farm like they do year round.
And how common is that as a lifestyle today?
I mean, the numbers are declining, decreasing. There's every year less farmers go to less Alps with less animals. That is a fact. But on the other hand, there still is a young generation that does take over from their parents, their grandparents, and that have realized that if one has great ideas or creative ideas and the power and the energy to really work and make dreams come true, that there is potential in this lifestyle too. I would say that the last past years that were not fun in many ways, with COVID, with all the climate change and so forth, has made people think a little more and consider a little more, and also ask questions a little more. And the lifestyle on the Alp is a very natural one, a very wholesome one, a very sane one in many aspects. And so yeah, I think there is a future for those who realize that you have to be imaginative but still keep the tradition going.
So, how does everybody know where to go? Like, who gets to decide which animals go and graze where?
And there's different organizations on the Alp. There's Alps that are privately owned, and there the family just goes with their own herd. Sometimes they bring animals from farmer friends who don't have a hut or don't have a dairy on their Alp. There are cooperations that people work together, and there's also cases where it's simply a corporation where the government or the village or some private people own land up on the Alp that also hosts a dairy, and they don't want to go on their own or don't have a farm or animals anymore, but they do hire people that will take care of the land up there, that bring animals and produce cheese.
I see. Okay. So when they take the animals up, there are sort of established pastures and established houses. I think you said huts. Um, what are the facilities like? I mean, is there, is there electricity? Are there caves that where they put the cheese after it's made? How does that work?
So also this, it goes from very old to state of the art modern and everything in between. That really depends from one case to the next. You can find everything. The I would say average, most do have electricity, yes. Some do have internet, some not. That depends a little bit also, on how high up you are, how many mountains are surrounding the mountain you are on. There are very large Alps that receive cheese, milk, let's say, from 50 farmers who go for the summer but don't make their own cheese because they might only have like 12 cows or only 17 cows. And it's very hard to make, cheese that makes sense with all the labor that is involved. So they rather sell the milk and they do it communally. Um, most chalets, we can say hut, we can say chalet. That sounds a bit more cultivated or a bit more romantic, but most nowadays are, they have a nice functioning kitchen. Um, Most still do make the cheese over a wood fire. Some do have a cave built right by the chalet where they might leave the cheeses over the winter and just go up every now and then and take care of the cheese. Some bring everything down. Some go up with a sled twice a week and bring down what they need for the week. So it's all very, very different. But what really is unique and uniform, and this is very important to understand what the product of transhumance is, the Alp cheese really. That always is a product that only is made throughout the summer and right where everyone is gathering. So you cannot transport milk, you cannot let stand the milk and then work it later or freeze the milk. Things like this are a no-no. And there is an organization in Switzerland that is in charge of, the control, the marketing, the support of Alp cheese producers. So it's always a seasonal product and it's always very, very farmstead.
Swiss cheeses are sort of famous, I think, among cheesemakers, although perhaps not cheese consumers, for being made in copper pots. Somewhat unique, I think. Why copper pots, and how widespread is that?
So there are cheeses like some AOP cheese, for instance, the famous Le Gruyère AOP. That one in the rule book, it says it needs to be made in a copper vat. No Gruyère AOP has been made in a different vat. It is the chemistry, it is what the copper and the milk do as an exchange. It's minerals, it's very clean, it's very easy to clean, and it is the material that was used since the 1100s to make Le Gruyère AOP and other cheeses. Most chalets that do work over open fire do use copper vats for the reason I said. They're not cheap at all. It's a big investment to buy a big vat, but they last you forever. The fire can't destroy them. It actually makes them more solid, more rustic, more durable. And this certainly is one of the criterias for what we call a Swiss cheese. I mean, there's a lot of facts or topics that make a cheese relatively Swiss. But this would be one. Another one would be, the tradition. Cheese making has been a very important trade for a long, long time in Switzerland. It was very fundamental to many farmers. That's why they started to go up on the Alps, because you can't grow up there, but you can make cheese and you can give the land down a break, and you can cut grass in two areas, high up and far down. So that gives you extra free food for the winter for those animals. All these are reasons.
So let's talk a little bit about that concept of what makes a Swiss cheese Swiss. I think, for people who sort of are not close to cheese, often you picture a big wheel with lots of holes in it, but of course there are many types of Swiss cheese. So what makes a cheese Swiss?
Well, I would say one thing is the tradition, also meaning the craftsmanship. Cheese has been made forever in Switzerland, and very, very far back, before the year 1000, let's say, cheese was sour cheese. It was not a rennet based cheese. It was just a product that basically letting milk getting spoiled and then making cheese out of this. Um, then later came the Roman way of cheese making, adding rennet, and this has stuck with Switzerland. So I think the tradition, that long, long, long way, and each generation passing actively on the craftsmanship, the recipes, the tools, even that gives the cheese in Switzerland basically a personality and a character. And then, of course, every region is different. As you said, there's not just the big holes in Swiss cheese. A Gruyere has basically no holes, ideally. And there's everything from left to right. Soft ripened cheeses, very classic ones, blue cheeses that most people don't even know the Swiss make. But I would say that the tradition, the craftsmanship that is so deeply rooted, that is one thing that makes the Swissness in cheese. Another thing is the terroir. Swiss cows have to be outside most every day of the year.
Mm.
Even in the very, very cold, very hot days, in the very hot days, it will be that they go out in the night when it's a bit cooler and a bit more of a relief. But there's laws that say that the cows have to be able to be outside. And even if that is just an hour a day in the very extreme temperatures, this is very, very important, because during that hour, a cow does never not eat. So even during that hour, she will eat and she will consume the natural biodiversity that is around. And this is a big, big difference to those cows that only consume, added food or power food or very balanced food. So this is a very, very important point when it comes to making cheese in Switzerland. Then also, that most cheesemakers, they nurture their own cultures, which is basically an expression of your surroundings and the cow's surroundings. I would say that is also a lot of breeds have a Swiss background, and in Switzerland, of course, they are right there, home where they belong to and come from.
Yeah. Um, so I have read that so the big fondue craze in the 70s was really driven by sort of the, I don't know, the National Cheese Board or whatever of Switzerland, and that as in other parts of Europe, that was really a product of sort of a consolidation of the cheese industry, sort of during and right after World War II. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can't talk about the fondue craze in the 70s. I was a little girl then.
So was
But
I, but my parents had a fondue pot.
And when I came here, that was one of the things that really amazed me, that all people that were a bit older than myself, they have a fondue, caquelin and rechaud and a whole kit. And I was like, that must have been a real
It was
thing
a
in the
real thing, yeah.
70s. Well, to this day, fondue, there are cheeses, when you're an AOP cheese, or when you have a rule book for a cheese that has to be made a certain way, if the cheese does not reach the quality level that's demanded, then the lower qualities, they become shredded cheeses and melted cheeses and so forth. And if you buy one of the ready packets of cheese, not the ones that have the liquid in,
Mm.
the dry things, the more mass industry things, you will find some of these cheeses. Of course, you cannot discern them, but so fondue was always a big thing. The institution you're talking about, that was called the Swiss Cheese Union, and it was an organization that was very, very led by the industry, by big players, by the big companies. And they basically supported producers of certain cheeses with money, and everything else did not get anything, not any support, not any ads, nothing. It was an almost military system, so to speak. And in at the end of the 90s, this construct really, was unstable, had become unstable before. Farmers didn't believe in that anymore. Producers, smaller producers, didn't believe in it anymore, and it just didn't make any sense with all the money that was put in and not
Mm.
dispersed evenly. So at the end of the 90s, this organization literally broke into itself and was non existent from one day to the next, basically. And that was the moment that was beautiful for Swiss cheese, because so many smaller, very creative, but also very tied up producers all of a sudden realized, I can make whatever
Mhm.
cheese I want, and I will not be in a disadvantage or in a different position than anyone else. And when you look at the landscape during the first part of the year 2000s, the, there were incredible amounts of new cheeses suddenly hitting the shelves and the cheese cave. So it was a good thing. It was a really good thing.
How did the union come about to begin with? Was it a sort of a government-driven thing? Was it
Yeah.
purely private industry or
No, it was government driven from the beginning. It was an combination. There were private uh, companies and titles too, but it was always government driven. Yes.
and why did they decide to do that?
It was after the wars when everything was, rationed and certain products were limited. They thought that, Switzerland always depended on agriculture and a lot on the dairy side of agriculture. So they wanted to guide this and to make sure there's enough for everyone. And it ended becoming a real commercial undertaking in the end.
Well, so now that we have all of these fantastic new cheeses coming out, what are some of the things that maybe if you don't happen to be wandering through Switzerland, but you still want to explore something other than Gruyere and Appenzeller, what should you look for?
Well, I would say if you have the chance to be there wherever you are, go into a small dairy shop. You will find cheese shops still in every little village. Go ask for the local specialty. Ask for a cheese that comes from the village or from the region. There's still a lot of small scale dairies that only produce a few little different cheeses of their own, and then they make maybe one staple like a Gruyere if you're more in the western part, or an Appenzeller that you mentioned if you're out east. But they now do create, and the landscape is incredibly colorful there. I mean, from really very tiny little soft ripened cheeses up to a lot of buffaloes lately. They are up and coming. A lot of farmers have buffalo project.
Interesting.
The city of Zurich, for instance, about 5 years ago, they founded a project that they are financially supporting farms who do tend to buffaloes and make dairy products out of their milk. So that was a new motivation. There's fabulous blue cheeses, and then the Alp cheeses are a whole own category that is very interesting. Also, there younger cheesemakers have stepped away from only making the traditional, 6 to 8 kilo, always same sounding wheel of Alp cheese. They make soft ripened things. They make very wonderful kefir, yogurt, of course, the butters. And I would say really go around and check out what's just around you. You can be anywhere. A cheese in Ticino has its own character. It will be more lactic, will have a grayish, thicker rind traditionally, because they have different cellars to age the cheeses in. So really go around with open eyes. You also at the same time should hit the local bakeries every day because the bread
Of course.
is
Well, and the local chocolate shops I
yeah,
bet too.
yeah. So, but no, there's a lot of very local little specialties that not even make it out of the canton, which is the same as a state here in the US,
Mm.
that never make it out of the canton because the production is just not large enough.
What about some of the cheeses that you bring over here? What are some of your favorites?
Oof, on what day?
Fair enough.
No, I mean, the cheeses, when you select cheeses, it's like with a book or with a collar, you're so tied to it and it always has a reason why you choose it. So it's hard to not mention one. But I deeply, deeply appreciate and value those Alp cheeses. And that was the origin, basically, why I had the idea. I wanted to do something for the producers of these cheeses, and why I founded Adopt an Alp was that I realized over time that I really love the lifestyle that these people live, that I also have a big respect of this lifestyle because it sounds much more charming than what it really is in everyday life during that summer. There's a lot of work involved. You have to do the work when it's time to be done, not when you feel like doing it. So this is really a tradition that speaks to my heart and that I have a big passion and love for. And the products are so incredible. When people ask me sometimes, so is this Alp cheese organically certified? That just brings a smile onto my face. Sometimes I grin more, but um, when you have to hike up to a place for 4 hours from the last spot where you can reach with the car, and then see how these people work, you see the grasses, the flower, the diversity those animals consume. You hear how their metabolism changes on day one once they're up there. When you see the milk being milked and being worked into cheese right away. No pumping of milk, no trucks, no driving. It can't get any purer or cleaner than this. And the result are, very, very high quality, very healthy, actually, cheeses. Alp cheese is about to be called a functional food in Europe, so a food that benefits the human body. So there's a lot. I really, really appreciate those cheeses. They are beautiful. But what I also could eat every single day, what always works for me, that is a soul cheese for me, is Le Gruyere. I grew up with this cheese. My parents were not very adventurous when it came to food. In
Mm.
our fridge, we always had hard cheeses only. And it was two at a time, not more, not less. And one always was a Gruyere. So this to me reminds me of my childhood. Sometimes I smell Gruyere and I see the table when I came home from school with an apple on it, a big loaf of bread, and a hunk of Gruyere. That was my afternoon snack and still makes me very happy. But I have a lot of cheeses that I really appreciate. My absolute favorite blue cheese is the Jersey Blue, a blue cheese made of Jersey cow milk in Switzerland by the person I think is the most talented cheesemaker of Switzerland, if not beyond, to say the least, Willy Schmid. It's Jersey Blue is beautiful blue cheese, never pierced. So each wheel you cut open has just this very unique, always different, gorgeous marbling that is really wild looking, very uneven looking. And I always say each Jersey Blue I cut open, I want to frame and hang on a wall. It's just so gorgeous.
That sounds like a fantastic art project.
Yeah, it would be. It would be.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. So if people want to find you or Adopt an Alp online, where should they go?
They can go on the website adopt-an-alp.com, adoptanalp.com, Instagram adoptanalp, Facebook adoptanalp, or they can go to my other website qualitycheese.net, all in one word, and you can Google me. You find me. If you need, you find me.
Okay, fair enough.
And be careful if people approach me or call me or email me. I love to talk about cheese, so could take a little while.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, thank you for taking the time today,
Thank
Caroline.
you so much. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Thanks for joining me and Caroline again this episode. Next time on the Curdverse, we'll dive a little deeper with the concepts of meltiness and stretchiness of cheese. We'll be looking at stretched curd cheeses, mozzarella, and beyond. So join me again next time as we once again enter the Curdverse.